Welcome to Dial-A-Drummer.
Dial-A-Drummer is brought to you by Session Ace. Whether you're looking for high-quality in-ear monitors, high-resolution studio microphones, or any other sort of thing that you need day-to-day as a musician, either in the studio or on stage, Session Ace provides remarkable tools for musical craftsmen. Find out more at sessionace.com. Hey there, and welcome to episode 24 of the Dial-A-Drummer podcast. I'm your host, Brian Stevens, and yeah, it's 2024, and it's only been like 8 months since our last episode. You want to know the backstory about why? You got a second? Oh, okay, I'll tell you. It's not what you think it might be, and thankfully, this story has a very happy ending. You know, for years, I've been trying to buy the dialadrummer.com domain. Up until, I don't want to give away the ending of the story, but up until this point, it's been housed at dialadrummer.net. And back in 2016, when I was looking to put together this podcast in its original version, I did a ton of due diligence and found that no one had done a podcast with this particular branding. Branding is very important in the world of podcasting. It's how you help to differentiate what you're doing. And in this case, put a little bit of a spin on exactly what it is or how it is that we do what we do here at Dial-A-Drummer. Well, with that due diligence done, I went to acquire the URL, the .com domain, to host the site for this podcast, and I found that dialadrummer.com had been purchased by a young person overseas, but it wasn't being used for anything. It just went to a blank page, and it stayed like that for at least 6 months before I decided to reach out and see if I could buy the .com from him. Now, after about 6 weeks of attempts, I pretty much got nothing. It was total crickets. So I moved forward, having bought the dialadrummer.net domain the moment that I decided that this was going to be the name and the branding for the podcast. Now, flash forward another couple of years, and that domain changed hands to someone who looked like they would be building a brand or a business on top of that .com domain. Having some correspondence with the new owner, it seemed like this entire brand, the Dial-A-Drummer brand, was about to fall out of my hands and become a large brand owned and operated by someone that I had absolutely no connection to. And at that point, it just kind of seemed futile to continue pushing Dial-A-Drummer as a brand for this podcast. And if I was going to continue doing a podcast, it'd have to be done under some other name. But then COVID hit. You know, the natural move would be to double down on this brand and make more episodes, because I wasn't really doing a lot of paying live gig work at the time. It was just studio stuff. I never left the house. But if you were paying attention, that didn't happen at all. And now you know why. I just didn't want to put more work into a brand that I was about to lose. But I hadn't come up with an alternate path to shift and move forward. So after sitting with this whole thing for about another 6 or 7 more months after the lockdown started, it became pretty apparent that the folks who were going to use dialadrummer.com as the vehicle for their new business had decided to postpone it or totally ditch their idea altogether. So I put out another few episodes just trying to keep things moving forward slowly and keep my hold on the Dial-A-Drummer moniker for this podcast. Flash forward almost a year, and an offer came to buy the Dial-A-Drummer domain. The owner was scrapping their plans, and for a mere $17,000, I could own this .com and essentially own the brand rights entirely. Well, I'm not sure about you, But even if I had that kind of scratch laying around, I was going to have to use it to help limp through the worst recession that we've ever seen in our lifetime. So my obvious answer at the time was no thank you. Now, meanwhile, I just kept an eye on it and watched as that dollar figure slowly dwindled down to under $10,000. Now, I was hoping that the owners would just fail to renew their ownership of the URL and that it would fall back into the public pool so I could pick it up. And they finally did let it lapse, but because it was registered with a large domain name service, who will go unnamed, the service shunted it into their domain name brokerage. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. But the offers immediately restarted from this new broker for a purchase price of almost 5 figures. Yeah, still not something I was going to pull the trigger on. So I'm at an impasse. I want to keep doing a drum podcast, but I don't know that this brand that I put all my chips into is safe from being pulled out from under me again. So 2024 rolls around, and honestly, I'm just not feeling the motivation to do much of any content creation at all. Not YouTube, not podcast, not much of anything. If you've noticed, the last 3 months, a lot of my content creation has really slowed down. Just hadn't really been motivated to do it. And the work has been steady enough that I hadn't had a ton of time either. But suddenly, an email hits my inbox, and I get an offer to buy dialadrummer.com. And it's a number that I can totally get on board with. Completely reasonable. So I immediately sent in a payment to the broker. And about a month later, I finally have, after almost 8 years of waiting and uncertainty, boom. The worst tabletop drum roll ever. I am now the proud owner of the dialadrummer.com domain. Thank you. So by the time you hear this episode, the trademark applications on the Dial-A-Drummer brand name will have been filed, and now I feel totally ready to move forward with this podcast brand full steam ahead. And if you're hearing this episode now, it means that your particular podcast app has switched its directory listing over to the proper dialadrummer.com RSS feed. And we're back in business. Now, knowing that this was in the works, I've started recording some new interviews and conversations that you're going to start hearing on a regular basis. My plan is to try and come out with something every other week until we can get into a more frequent cycle. So that brings me to today's episode. It's hard to believe that this interview was recorded over a year ago. You got part 1 of the interview about 8 months ago, and now I'm excited to let you hear part 2 of my conversation with Pat Petrillo. Now, a lot has happened for Pat and his album since this interview was originally recorded. Pat dropped a music video for the song 48th Street featuring Nile Rodgers on guitar. His single, Knocks Me Off My Feet, also got some great airplay on satellite and terrestrial radio throughout 2023. Now, in addition to being on the cover of Modern Drummer magazine in February 2023, Pat and his band were featured performers at this year's NAMM show out in Anaheim, California. He's also been back out traveling to do clinics and masterclasses all over the U.S. In late 2023, Pat released the Rack and Roll cymbal cart through his website, patpdrummer.com, where you can also buy this album. And as of this recording, Pat has also now signed with Intervisions Records and is currently working on his next album. That first single is slated for a June 2024 release, and the full album is currently scheduled to be out in the fall of 2024. So I guess at some point we'll have to have Pat back on the show to talk about all the stuff that he's got going on for 2024 and 2025. But for now, enjoy part 2 of this conversation with the one and only Pat Petrillo. And that is Runnin', the Earth, Wind, and Fire cover by Pat Petrillo and his Big Rhythm Band. And I think we just melted Amp, dude.
Amp is on a meltdown. Amp ran out of amps.
That drum solo, I think, just melted everything. The servers, everything. That's a great solo. So that's the first take right out of the gate.
One take, only take, bro. God's honest truth.
Man.
That's my Asia moment.
The thing about that, though, is, and I think this is kind of lost on the internet generation, especially the Instagram generation, the YouTube generation. I know for a fact because I've had students that have come through and studied with me that are some of those people. And the thing that I know from having seen their process is, you look at a 45-second thing on Instagram or something, or a 2-minute, 3-minute thing, some kind of drum cover or something on YouTube. That person probably did 50 takes or 150 takes. They probably took 5 days to do that one little piece of content. And the thing about a solo like yours, that people, I think it's lost on younger people, is there are decades of playing drum solos, playing music with other people, studying different styles. The way that you take all of your influences, whether it's the funk stuff, the rudimental stuff, the Latin stuff, you weave all that into that solo for it to just flow out of you. It wasn't something that you sat and practiced for weeks.
Nope.
And you didn't do a bunch of it. That's
another good point is people ask me too about preparing for a record, are you practicing a lot? And it's like, I'm obviously practicing with the band. I'm working on the tunes on my own, but I'm not working out shit to go in there and cut unless necessarily the groove. Obviously the groove has to be worked out because I'm not going to go in there and waste time and money.
Sure.
So the groove and the form and all that, I know what I'm going to do. I don't know every fill I'm going to do until I do it necessarily. I got a general idea, but that solo came out because we've been gigging as a band for a good couple years now. So this is in our arsenal. So when we do play live, like the Cutting Room last night in New York was a really fun record release show, and I do a solo, and every time I do a solo, it's different. And it does, you do have recall with stuff that you've learned and studied and practiced over the years. I'm composing at the moment, Sure. It's a composition. It's not a lick fest, necessarily. I'm playing rhythmically, hopefully, with color. Tone is a big consideration. Dynamics is a big consideration, but ultimately it's just an expression of what I'm feeling at the moment. And it's not in time, if you notice, at the beginning, and then goes into like a Baião Brazilian feel, samba, and it accelerates a bit. And as it accelerates, so that's like an homage to the samba that you just heard before that. And then I go into, we got to end it with a flurry. And this is, the stuff that I know that I play is it kind of licky? And some points it is, but everybody has a bag, whether it's Gad or somebody they'll pull out, in Asia, it's Gad when he does that stuff, you know. When it's Dennis Chambers, you know it's that, I'm not saying when you hear my shit, you're like, oh, that's Pat, because I know that ain't it necessarily for me right now, but I have a bag. Everybody sort of has a bag of stuff. So you do call on those things, but ultimately it comes from years of study and practice, and then the musicality comes out just from experience, I think.
It definitely shows in that solo that there's this wealth, there's this subtext that's a combination of decades of playing, decades of listening to music, decades of your own really studious study of the instrument. And if I didn't know all the things I knew about you before I listened to that solo, I would still have that same feeling. I wouldn't have the detail to put with it. But, whether it was the study of styles, the study of the rudiments, and how deep that you go, it's all right there.
Thank you, brother.
And it's great. It's great. It's fabulous. So talking about the deep study of things, some of these other tracks that are on here, within just a few bars of Black Cow, not even knowing it was Black Cow, immediately Steely Dan comes to mind. And part of it was the chord changes, but part of it was just the lope and the feel. And again, Paul Humphrey originally played on that track, and it has a certain kind of swagger to it.
Did you know? Yeah. Did you know? I'm gonna tell you right now that this is something that I just found out that I was finding little tidbits to talk to the crowd about in between each track.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know Paul Humphrey was the drummer on Lawrence Welk?
I had no idea.
Are you freaked out right now?
Thank you, boys.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, man.
Wow.
And I'm like, wait a minute. And I go look at the video and say, damn, yes, that's it back there. I was like, that's right. He did play that show. I mean, I was a little baby, but I mean, nonetheless, it's like, daggone, to go from there and all the sessions he's done, he's probably played on so much stuff we never even heard of.
Sure.
We didn't know it was him, you know what I mean? But yeah, that's him. That's him on the original. So yeah, just playing like with that one, like it's got a lilt, but I wanted to make it up-tempo a bit more. And I wanted to have definitely put a definitive swing to it, almost a gospel style swing, contemporary gospel swing style to that. That's what I was bringing to that one instead of more of a kind of a chill vibe. I wanted to just amp it up, especially with Oz playing on it, because that's the way he is, the way he plays.
And that was in my note too, with question marks, is that Oz playing guitar on there. Because again, the guy's got a voice that it's pretty recognizable when you hear him.
Yeah, yeah.
It's awesome. So while we're talking about influences and different things, Hey Pockway's on this record. And I'm a huge Meters fan, have been a huge Meters fan forever. And this is a great reinterpretation. A lot of people have recorded this tune, but I don't think I've quite heard it done this way.
Yeah, believe it or not, it's an arrangement that I bought, and it's hard to find good arrangements. Yeah. But if you buy a good arrangement when it has pretty good bones, you can always kind of, futz around with it and revoice it a bit, or take this out, put that in. So I started with a great arrangement that I bought. We kind of tweaked it, you know what I mean?
Sure.
That's the best way I can say it. It's like, when we played through the chart a few times, I was like, okay, this is good. And then we hit a spot, I was like, nah, this is corny. And then we kept going, oh, this is good, yeah. And it's like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. So we did that. And like my study, like, listen, all of American music comes from New Orleans. So I love this feel because I like you say, study and learn and listen to a lot of music over the years. But like when I was a puppy studying at the Collective and taking all those classes when I went there out of college, I was like, I got into it with Ricky Sebastian, and he was explaining to me about some roots of stuff. But I did some research in college about Second Line, about what it came from, what the roots of Second Line really is, and the funeral marches that date back to the Civil War and all that, and all those times, and how those bands started, and then what's the Mardi Gras Indian rhythms like, and so studying with those guys and learning specifically what that is, and then doing my own research. Like a Second Line is not a clave beat.
Right.
So I'm gonna jump on the drums again. It's education time, folks.
Go for it.
So, it kind of bugs me a little bit, and it's got to bug like New Orleans people, like people say, like, play a Second Line, and most drummers would do this. Well, that's the Bo Diddley beat. That's not a Second Line, That's Bo Diddley. That's 3/2 clave beat, that's Mardi Gras Indians, you know? Contemporarily, that has changed things a little bit, but a traditional second line is more like this. You know, that kind of 2-beat thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like a marching band went to church.
Yeah, exactly. Now you could take that and then kind of do a reverse clave to that. So if you do that. You know what I mean? So now that's sort of the vibe of this, a lot faster though. So kind of did it a second line, but Hip Hockey Way is more of a Mardi Gras India, but I fused them together. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I just have a deep love for that music because without that, we wouldn't be where we are today, really, with anything.
Oh, definitely not. Definitely. Well, speaking of deep love for music, I happen to know that you have a deep love for another kind of music and another drummer, because he's ended up being the impetus for something on 2 records for you at this point. When I heard It Won't Be Long, and I'm like, well, of course Pat's going to put a Beatles cover on this record. He's a huge Beatles fan.
Huge, man.
I mean, your whole last record, you actually recorded at Abbey Road Studios. And tell me, how was this process, not just the studio being different, how was this process on this new record different from the other record, the Abbey Road Sessions?
The Abbey Road Sessions was the first record for the band 3 years ago, and all the impetus comes from Kickstarter. So anybody and everybody who's contributed and helped out in my Kickstarter campaigns to make this happen, I greatly appreciate you so much, and I hope you enjoy the music that you've helped me to create for your listening enjoyment. So it all comes down to having, the budgets. Because I didn't have a label. I had a band, but I had no label. I had no real support. So the Kickstarter was it, So basically, I always wanted to record there. So I had an engineer friend. I had been there once before with an engineer friend showing me around, but I had just basically got, the booker's number and gave her a call and, told her who I was and this and that. And, we hit it off well. And then one of the times I was over there doing some drum clinics, I met up and went in there and explained what, I was going to do, got a little tour, got some rates, and said, okay, well, if I do 3 days or 2 days, can you help me out, this and that? So they came up with a great package and it worked out fine, and I did the Kickstarter, we raised the funds. So I had to record these songs that we have, when we were playing, we have like about 8 to 10 Beatles tunes that are orchestrated for horns that worked out perfectly. So, but I wanted to use, more than me recording in Studio 2 in the same corner as Ringo did, using a couple of the same microphones.
Yep.
I wanted to use the real pianos on these cuts. I wanted to use the Mrs. Mills for Obladi Oblada.
Yep.
I wanted to use the Challen, for Lady Madonna. And so I wanted to have those keyboards on the real keyboards on the record. So, and then I just, Ludwig was like, what kit you want for this thing? I said, well, I don't want a new kit. I need a vintage. I need a 65, 66, super classic. So we found, John Henry's out there had one. So we got a rental for a few days. And then it's hard to find, the Jazz Fest snares. So I just put an APB out. Anybody in London who's renting or who has, a 5.5 Jazz Fest, and like 3 different guys hit me up. So I said, I'll make a deal with you. I'll let you come hang in the studio. Just bring me your snares.
Yeah. Nice.
So they was like, oh, it's my pleasure. So they showed up with their snares. So that was that. And then Paul Francis, when he was at Zildjian, I said, listen, I definitely need Ringo's setup. I need a 20 with rivets and an 18. So he made some Avidus cymbals for me that sound just like his cymbals from, the 60s, even though he used I know he had a U-fit, but he also used a Peisty something or another on some records. But and then 14 and 15-inch hats, Avidus hats. Oh, yeah. And then basically I couldn't bring the whole band. So that process on this record was we recorded the horns here in Jersey, and I did just rough click track drums.
Right.
Recorded all the horn parts and bass and a little bit of guitar, because I was going to do some guitar there and then overdub guitar when we got back. But so I basically, that was, for me, that record was a play along record.
Right.
So we sent the tracks over there, had a pre-production meeting, had two great engineers that day before. We talked through everything, what we're going to use. We used some of the same freaking compression that the Beatles used. It was like giving me the tour of like, well, they use this compression. I'm like touching this compression. Yep. I'm like, oh, it's like the original ones that like they invented and shit,
The stuff that people are buying plugins for now.
Yeah, oh yeah. So we just went, used the real stuff. We used we had some real D20 mics that were actually still on Ringo's kit. They were beat to shit. Oh, nice. But there was a couple of them they still had there. But the guys were great. They knew what I was going for, and it's like, this is not like a hokey, thing, and then they heard the tracks, like, man, you guys sound great. I said, well, the drums gotta match it. Obviously, it's going to be better sounding than it was back then because of the technology, but I want it still be modern, but with that same kind of edge, the same vibe, Yeah. So I use the same drums, and listen, Ringo's in my DNA, as many people it is, but the feel, I just tried to, I took his parts, and then some of them I kind of changed up a little bit. We did a bunch of tunes, man. So that record is going to be back out. You can get a few copies on Amazon, I believe, now in CD, but I'm going to convert it over to my new label. So that's going to be a little bit in process.
Brings me to this question I have, and I hadn't had a chance to talk with anybody. Back in May, I got a mid-60s vintage Ludwig kit that was gifted to me, of all things. And I've got a lot of different drum kits, 13, 14 different drum kits that, most of them are Gretsch, but I've got a newer Ludwig kit from the 90s. And so it's got that kind of sound. I've got one other vintage kit that I play occasionally. It's a WFL kit from 57, but it's set up more for a real wide open jazzy kind of thing. This new kit from the 60s, I definitely set it up for that kind of that classic rock sound that you think of. I know that you got a vintage kit not too long ago.
Yes, sure did.
What are the differences? We all would like to think we could get one drum kit. And, if you get the greatest whatever brand, whether it's Ludwig, DW, whatever, Gretsch, whatever, that you can change the heads or tape them up or leave them wide open and get all kinds of different sounds. What's the real difference for you with a real authentic vintage kit versus something brand new?
Well, I can't speak for other brands. All I can speak for is Ludwig.
Sure.
What I do know is Ludwig makes the drums the same way they did back then.
Yep.
So if you get a kit from 1965, the only difference is it's not going to have white paint in it.
Okay.
If you get a mahogany kit, the Legacy Mahogany series is the same as they made them in the 50s and 60s.
Okay.
If you get a Legacy Maple kit, it's going to be just like they made them with the rings. It's exactly the same. It truly, truly is. So there's really not much difference at all. A vintage kit, depending on what shape it's in, may be a little warped here and there. Might have some, the edges may be a little off, whatever. But like the vintage kit that I just got was a 66 super classic. And so it had that white paint on the inside.
Yep.
And 16 floor, 13 rack, 14 by 22 kick drum.
Yep.
But it's literally just like the Legacy Mahogany kit that's sitting right here next to me. I mean, it's mahogany, poplar mahogany with the rings. And it's really the same kit. It's really not any different. And except for the tone things, that are in there, the tone arms. Like the only new Ludwig kits that have a tone arm is the reissue Jazz Fest, which I have, the 5.5.
Yeah.
And that has a baseball bat, tone muffle on it. The other drums don't. But that's the big difference. The finishes are the Black Oyster Pearl is exactly like it looked back then. So it's really not much difference, man. Now, if you're talking about a 90s Ludwig kit, now or 80s like rock and roll Ludwig kit, that's a little different story with the mock lugs, more of a straight shell.
Yeah, the kit that I have, the classic maple kit I have is like 97, 98. And yes, it's just a straight maple shell. And, no matter what heads I put on there, you play it and it's like, oh yeah, there's your maple kit drum sound right there.
Yeah.
If I want something a little more vintagey and that I don't know why I call it birthday cake toms, that sound,
Sure.
that deep thuddy.
Yeah.
It's resonant without resonance. It's weird. I have to kind of tape them down a bit because those 90s Ludwigs are very resonant. I mean, you depending on how you tune them, especially if you tune the top and the bottom head to be the exact same pitch, man, the decay on that thing is pretty long, especially the floor tom. Whereas the thing I instantly noticed about these mid 60s, I think it's a downbeat kit. It's 2012, 14.
The club date, yeah.
And so
a smaller, like early Ringo kit.
Yeah. It's instead of the single tension rod casing, it's the two. It's got the two. It's got separate for the top and the bottom heads. But the thing that I noticed is immediately when I just put single ply coated heads on there, kind of it found its own tuning range. Like it almost told me where it wanted to get tuned at. And then when I hit it without any dampening, it was that sound, like the sound that I notice on so many classic rock records. It's like, well, there's the sound. Instead of futzing around with it on a newer kit, you just put the heads on the old kit, you tune it to where it wants it to go, and there's the sound.
But you'll notice, especially that with rock stuff and the deeper toms, I know what Ludwig it is, and there's some, since they don't really make Rogers anymore, that's kind of hard to tell. Slingerland Radio King snares definitely has its own vibe. A Rogers Dynasonic has its own vibe. But you can't beat Ludwig's snares. You can't beat, between the Supraphonic, the Acrolite, the Black Mat, the Black Beauty, the Vista Light snare. So all of those have such unique sounds. But old to new, not much different. But I just wanted, when I recorded this record, to have that old wood. I just wanted to have that broken in, period piece.
Right.
That puts you sort of in the vibe.
It's got that mojo to it. It instantly puts you in that era.
Yep.
It kind of it informs your choices. Definitely.
That's for sure.
So with the new record, what kit did you use? How was your setup different?
Great question. I used two different kits. And so when I did the pre-production with Roy and the engineer and the assistants, and I said, listen, this is definitely a diverse record, so I'm using two different kits. One was my Legacy Mahogany 1012 14 floor and 14 by 22 and mahogany, and that's used on the more modern 48th Street, Black Cow. But then on like Hey Pockway and the Rock tunes, I used the smaller kit, which is also a mahogany kit. It was 12 rack, 14 floor, and 20 by 14 kick. But I used a variety of snares, and I'm looking at them now. I brought 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I brought about 6, 7 snares with me. Different depths. I brought a Copperphonic, a 6.5. I brought the regular Supraphonic. I brought the Black Beauty. I brought a Vista Light. I brought an Acrolite. I marked down somewhere which I used on what. I probably need to break that out to let people know more definitively. But
Sure. I'd like to know.
Yeah, I don't know specifically which one. I forget. I used the Black Beauty a lot. I used the Superphonic a lot, and I used the Acrolite a lot. I know that.
That's the triumvirate. I tell most of my students,
Yeah.
when you're starting, I'm a huge Gretsch person and always have been, but I always tell my students the triumvirate, like if you're starting a snare collection, those are the three that you have to start with.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
I would agree.
That's especially between the Black Beauty and the Acrolite. Like any snare collection has to have those two.
Well, I tell you an old story about a snare drum that I found on the street, and I told you that the beginning of the whole thing. I found this on a dump pile. I was driving by, and you have those things where yeah, right, you just found this. You hear these stories of guys, yeah, man, I found this on the curb. Some guy was throwing it away, drove by, it was in pristine condition, dude. So I literally did find this, and I looked and I said, that's a damn snare drum. And I pulled over and I looked at it and I said, little buddy, you're coming with me. You could have been a Rogers. You could have been a Gretsch. You could have been, no, you are a mid-60s Pioneer 6-lug.
That's a hell of a puppy to find on the side of the road,
you
Pat.
are coming with me, little buddy. And then I gave it to my buddy Anthony. He fixed it up, spiffed it up, tuned it up good, it's the original strainer, original snare guts. And it really was in very good shape. I don't know why the dude was throwing it away. I have no idea. He was just cleaning out his basement. But it's Duco, and it's probably 65, 64 maybe. And it's my new snare. It's not going to leave my kit. I used it last night. I'm using it all the time now. The matching snare that goes with this kit sitting up on the shelf. So, but I do want to say on this, there's a track called Global Warming that I wrote that's a real weather report-y fusion-y on this new record.
Yep.
I had Uli Salazar from Ludwig. I said, man, I really want a 13, but I want a deep 13, a 6x13. Mm. So that has kind of been my side snare, and it's popping. So I used that on. This track is like that's definitely a weather report-y, fusion-y kind of track, and I used a regular. I think I used the Black Beauty on it, and then for the second half of the tune, I went to the 13 side snare, and you'll hear a complete big difference on that track. So that's what I used on that for sure.
Cool. Yeah, that's one where my first thoughts, I wrote Weather Report and Billy Cobham meets Brecker Brothers. Like,
yeah, meets Brecker. Dig that. Yeah. Still skunk funky, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That was my first impression of the whole thing, and it's a great track. How did that one come to be?
Well, I recorded that originally about 20 years ago with a buddy, Dave Falciani. He passed away, unfortunately. He was a great keyboard player from Philly. And I recorded that track with him. And it's actually his track. And then I kind of reworked some of the horn parts and rewrote a second part of it. And it did kind of a mashup. So, and it's in a kind of a different tempo, kind of a different feel. So it's really mostly Dave's track, to be honest.
Sure.
And but it's my homage to him too, because he was in our band and our Philly band, and he was just a great. He's a Louis Zawinul clone, man. Yeah. But when you saw him, you wouldn't think he was a jazz guy, man. He's really goth, man. He was really like wore black all the time, had long stringy black dyed hair, had burning incense all the time, But when you go in the studio and he's like blowing over changes and playing, he was amazing. You would think that he was just like a 9-Inch Nails kind of dude,
Sure.
It was amazing what he could play. So he's gone way too soon, but that was like a homage to him, sort of like a fusion-y Philly kind of vibe. And but what we didn't talk about, I don't know if you have it on your list, is my cymbals.
That's my next question, because obviously you use some very different cymbals than what you used on the previous record.
Yeah. The first, like we were saying, the Avidus was that. So I don't know if those of you may know that I designed the organic ride for Zildjian. So it's a 21-inch K-Custom organic ride. It's been on the market for, it's about 8 years now, 7-8 years. And it's one of their top-selling ride cymbals. It's a ride cymbal that's has just enough spread. You can crash it and has a great bell. So I know there's a new Zildjian symbol out there that's in the concept line that's I'm not going to mention, but has similar attributes, so they say. But this is this is the original, and it's really it's very musical. It's got a beautiful tone, and it's not clangy, or it's not like a lot of cymbals today are trashy. This is not trashy. It's got a nice, just enough spread. As a matter of fact, Sweetwater has had it as part of their studio recording cymbal kit. Like if you go on Sweetwater, you can get what they call their Zildjian recording thing or whatever. Great for recording situations. And this is the ride they put in there with
cool.
a couple of crashes and a set of hi-hats. And they say, if you want going to be in the studio, this is what cymbals you should get. So it's that kind of great recording of a cymbal. So it's K Custom Organic. And then I used the 18 super dry, special dries.
Yeah.
So I used 18 special dry. I used 16 dark K dark crashes.
Oh yeah.
I'd say mostly Ks. And then on my left, I used a couple different crash rides but I have something new that I'm working on now with them. But I used a Karope.
Those are good.
A Karope 18 on my left a lot. I have a 14-inch K splash kind of crash, or 12 splash and a smaller 14 K crash. The hats are a combination. I have a 14-inch Master Sound bottom with a thin Karope top.
Oh wow!
And that's a really nice sound because you got the thin top with a really cool bottom that has a little thicker, got that edge to it, the Master Sound. But I'm working on now is a 19-inch K Custom organic ride, but organic crash ride.
Oh, okay.
So I'm working on one that's like the little sister. So it has definitely more crash, like the organic ride can't really stand alone as a crash. It's a 21.
Right.
So we're making a 19. So this is a little sample.
Cool.
So it's really sweet sounding, and we'll see what happens with it, but it's that's what's sitting on my left side right now. 13K Master Sounds, but for most of the record, and for the rock record, I used those 15 Avidus hats. I think I used them on Asbury Days.
Oh, cool. Yeah, 15s are my new favorites. So yeah, I'm way into 15s at this point.
So the 14, Karope top and a Master Sound bottom is what I generally use mostly now.
So now Sweetwater needs to make a set that they call the Pat Petrillo Signatures line. That's that top and that bottom.
I won't hold my breath with that. But I mean, we'll see if the crash ride makes it out there one day. But hey, I got one. I'm happy with it. So it's like
you're good. You're all good.
Yeah, I'm good.
Very cool. Well, man, I really appreciate you sitting and talking with me at great length about this record.
Great.
It's such a great record. I was so glad to get a chance to really dig deep into it this weekend. I'm looking forward to getting that vinyl. That's going to be an even better experience.
It's going to sound great. But, if everybody can, just try to put it in your playlist.
Yeah.
Put it in your playlist, guys, and I greatly appreciate it. And if you want, hit me up on Instagram, Pat P Drummer. You'll find me. And the website, patpdrummer.com. You can get T-shirts, vinyl, CD. You can get it there.
Great. Well, I would encourage everybody, regardless of whether if you've got a turntable, go ahead and order this thing on vinyl. That has become such a special experience for me nowadays to get something on vinyl, to sit down in front of a pair of speakers and to just basically let go of the entire world and put on side one. And then you get to the end of side one, you take a little bit of a break, go refill your glass and come back for side two. And all of a sudden your day is just so much better. Your week instantly gets better. So make sure you go hit the website. And until the vinyl gets there, you can listen to it on all the streaming platforms. They can pretty much find out everything they want to about how to follow you on social by going to your website and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is Pat P Drummer, and you'll find me on Instagram for sure.
And that, friends, was my interview with Pat Petrillo. Thanks so much for your patience in getting this part 2 out. Now that you know a little bit of the backstory, you'll know why it's taking us so dang long. And I'm really, really glad to get the rest of this conversation out. You can go right now and pick up a vinyl copy of the album, The Power Station Sessions, at patpdrummer.com. If you just want to play it in your car, you want to play it in your home, you want to play it in your earbuds, you can go to any of your favorite streaming services and the entire album is there. So again, thanks so much for listening. If you're digging the stuff that you're hearing here, make sure to share this with a friend. If you're new to the Dial-A-Drummer world, there's 23 other episodes that you can go back and listen to with some great guests and covering some great topics. There's plenty of stuff for you until our next episode, which should be in a couple of weeks. Also, feel free to follow us everywhere on social media. We're Dial-A-Drummer on Instagram, Facebook. You can find the Dial-A-Drummer video version of the podcast on YouTube. It's about to switch over and become part of my regular YouTube channel at brianstevens.com/YouTube. Please subscribe to that as well. And there's just so many different things. I've got to get back in the rhythm of doing this, but I look forward to it. We've got some great guests coming up. We've got some incredible topics, and this next one's going to be a real hot button issue. I don't want to spoil the surprise. I'm just gonna let you hear it when it pops into the feed in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much for coming back. Thank you for supporting the podcast for the last 8 years. Some of you have been listening since episode 1, and you've patiently waited as I've just put them out at my leisure. But we're going to get this thing ramped up and get plenty of great content in your ears, plenty of great stories, plenty of great information, plenty of great actionable items that you can use to make everything better for you as a drummer. But for this episode, that's all I got for you. Until next time, please be awesome to yourself, be extra awesome to everyone you meet. And until next time, I'll see you when I see you. Thanks so much.